Start out easy. First, I want to welcome you, Ms. Jones. Welcome. I'm so happy that you could join us. PNN, Progressive News Network, has really focused on helping activists get their voice out, and nothing pleases me more than have a fellow data scientist, a journalist, an activist who's not afraid to take a principled stand. So I salute you. Okay.
Thank you.
I want to start easy. I want to start simple. I'm going to ask you, when did you first get intrigued by the sciences, maybe especially computer science, but just the sciences in general?
Oh, I was actually a very late bloomer for that. So I grew up in very rural, deep South Mississippi, actually about 2 hours from where I live now in Pensacola. And we had one required science class in all of high school, and it was intro to biology, which you took like your freshman year, and that was it. Now I took the math track all the way through to calculus, which was as high as it went when I was in high school. So I always was in love with math, but science to me was a mystery. We weren't taught much beyond like the basic, scientific method. Our biology teacher had to give a classroom disclaimer when we went over the required one lesson on, evolutionary biology. And I'm not endorsing this. I'm teaching it. We're going to talk about the science only, and that's where we're going. So that's the kind of town that I grew up in. It wasn't until actually I took a climate change course at Syracuse under one of my best advisors, Dr. Jane Reed, that I started to see how interconnected everything was, how important it was to understand systems, especially Earth systems, because, I grew up on the Gulf Coast. I went through Katrina, and I was 16 when Katrina hit. So I was more than well aware of the social ramifications of natural disasters, but understanding the physics and the science behind them, to me, it made things I had seen happen my whole life finally make sense. And it really was that class that I fell in love hard and deep. And I just took that, interest in climate all the way to my PhD in Florida State. That's what I majored in at LSU for my master's. And I retained my journalism degrees because I guess this was, to be forecasted for my life. I wanted to be a truth teller. I wanted to be thrown into the worst places in the world. I actually wanted to be a war journalist. And what really got me interested in journalism as a kid was actually the Blood Diamond series. So I wanted to cover the stories that were tough, that needed to be told right. Yeah, the voice to the voiceless, which is one kind of what we say is a sector within journalism. Absolutely. And when I had my son unplanned, my junior year of college, writing about the horrible, awful things that were happening wasn't enough for me. And I don't mean to, I still have mad respect for every journalist who devotes their lives to that. I've got good friends, because I was a journalism major, who do that. But for me, I wanted to find a way to fix things. And the science of climate change seemed to me to be the way to do that, to find a way to contribute to the greater knowledge of climate change. And because I grew up on the Gulf Coast, hurricanes were where I was drawn to. And so I became a hurricane climatologist.
Well, I personally, having one foot in the sciences and one foot in journalism, I can completely understand To me, you can't divorce truth from either journalism or science, and that twinning, that bringing together of them both is the absolute sweet spot. You know, what better study of man than man? And so, my gosh, kudos. Um, and you said you want to go to the worst place. Obviously, you landed in Florida, uh, where where
I wasn't
science.
thinking of Florida. I was thinking the third world more. We're
Well, you know,
fixing Florida. We're on a path to fix Florida. So it's not all bad.
you're absolutely right. I had the good fortune to live in Florida most of 40 years. I have a great love for it. I'm very sad about so many of the things that have happened there, but I understand that you're still on a trajectory to make things better. But before we get to that, I also want to say, so you were working as a scientist, and obviously to do that, you pay attention to a lot of numbers. That number crunching, data analysis, dealing with complex multiple inputs, and then trying to make some sense of it. Infographics, one of the other buzzwords in the art, taking that raw data and making it comprehensible.
Yep.
Time permitting later, I'll tell you some of my adventures in that arena, but that's enough said there. Okay, so you found yourself at some point engaged to work with the state, preparing climate data, hopefully making it accessible to those whose attention span is rather modest, it seems. Talk
Well, I
about your
worked
first work
for,
in the government.
so my first government job was actually in Louisiana. I worked for the State Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority as the sole hurricane climatologist at an agency that was founded after Hurricane Katrina for the purpose of dealing with hurricanes and climate change. Well, and the thing is too, is I got hired before I even finished my master's. Like I was young. I was 22 years old, you know, or no, wait, 24. Oh God. 24 years old. And I was, you know, smart and a fast learner, but that's a lot of weight for a recent, you know, master's student. I mean, I ended up having to correct some of the most fundamentals of our models because I was like, you can't take the average track of a storm for a hurricane reanalysis based on your 400 storm suite. I was like, it doesn't, there's more things that matter than exactly where it hits. It matters where it came from, where it's going. I mean, hurricanes even, you know, have a tilted axis. So it was just like, you can't, if it comes from the west versus the east, it's an entirely different storm. Has no one told you people this? And so, you know, that's, and I was having these conversations with like Arcadis. And so these are, you know, companies that should know better, but, you know, sometimes, and that's why subject matter expertise is so important. You have a lot of data people who say, okay, well, we want to recreate, you know, a storm from 1992. This one in our model suite hit, you know, we're the same place. I was like, yes, but it came from a different trajectory and it hit and then went into a different trajectory, different forward motion. You know, there's more that matters than just for where it hit and how fast the winds were. And apparently I rubbed some people the wrong way by saying, no, this is not how you do hurricane science, but that had to be said. You're talking about like $80 billion worth of projects across the entire coast of Louisiana. You gotta get the storms right. If you don't do that first step right, every project that you model, every levee that you propose building is going to be off. It's ridiculous. So after I worked there for a couple of years, while my husband was finishing his second master's degree, actually in biostatistics. And then I was going to go to Syracuse for my PhD. I got in, and in Syracuse, a PhD is a big deal and they have to have full funding. But my husband wanted to do that second master's. So I tried to delay it for a year, which is a big no-no. Had a couple options, but decided to go the next year to Florida State to do my PhD on paleotempestology. And so I moved here, and after I finished my coursework, I had to get a real job to pay the bills because I have, you know, a child. And that's when I took a job at DOH in their environmental health department. So dealing with things like toxicity, exposure, data modeling, all kinds of environmentally, centered health issues, which for me put me in the disease control and health prevention office, which is where they combine environmental health, which was bizarre. I don't think a toxic spill is really comparable to like influenza, but that's where I ended up. And less than a year later, I got promoted to be the head of the office to run the entire, geospatial data and analysis part of our agency, which oversaw 268 people, and didn't even get paid 50 grand a year for it with advanced degrees. That's Florida. They do not pay their state employees anything. It is, we're 47th in teacher pay in the country. Our state employees, they're basically trying to privatize and sell off everything by starving the talented kind of, people who want to go into public service. It's really shameful. But by the time COVID came around, I was the only person in disease control who had a robust statistics background, who had ran data management for the agency and could present things in a way that were easily consumable because I had a lot of education experience in journalism. My master's degree was actually a dual major with my hurricane climatology and crisis communication. So I was I was kind of like in the exact space that I needed to be. And after 2 months of begging to build a public information portal, they decided that they needed one. And I think they say, the rest is history.
I've worked in those ambiguous spots where you're kind of beholden to 2 or 3 masters trying to get something done almost against the stream. So again, I have so much sympathy and respect for what you had to do. And you found yourself, obviously having bumped heads with the industrial Gulf Coast as you did previously. You were not a person to bend to the faintest wind. You knew the science, you knew what work had to be done, you knew the data you had to get. I'm sure that with that tumult that was the beginning investigations of COVID, there were all kinds of theories being thrown around, all kinds of data sets being, let's say, so much data sometimes can be confusing rather than informative. And so you found yourself with all these data sources. What were some of your next steps?
So I had, as the data manager, and then eventually as the manager of COVID-19 data and surveillance for the Department of Health, unlimited access to all of our data. And there was a lot of it. And I was fortunate enough, especially in the early days, to have the freedom to decide what was most important. And I know now that would never happen. The craziest thing is now I know that would never happen. They would never, no state agency probably in the country would leave it to an actual scientist to determine what information needs to be presented to the public.
A scientist? Are you kidding?
I know, but in this fluke situation, I was able to say, I think we need this, this, and this. Of course, I had supervisors who was like, well, we want to make sure we have this, or we don't want this. And it was a little bit of a give and take, but there was a lot of push to kind of mimic what was happening at Johns Hopkins. And I fought back against that. I said, look, people are afraid. This is about the whole point of a public information portal is to empower people with knowledge. If they pull up a map of Florida, and as this thing continues to grow, which it will, everything is red. That is a very paralyzing fear, because that means there's nowhere to go where this isn't. There's no safety. All they see is it's everywhere, which is what Johns Hopkins was showing with these giant red dots. I think a chloropleth probably would have done it better, but these giant red dots over every single country. It was like, it's everywhere. That's scary. I said, I wanted to do Florida Department of Health colors and branding. So our light blues, our light yellows, things that looks like Florida. But I was told to make it dark, like Johns Hopkins. And I said, fine, but I'm not putting red anywhere on that dashboard. I was like, I will, and I didn't. I used blues, greens, yellows. I made sure that I was like, people are afraid. If you knew the first thing about design, you would know that red is the propaganda color that triggers fear. It is a blood, it's the color blood. It is the way that we as humans have evolved to be afraid of things. And I won that fight, thank God. But I didn't win the light blues and the more relaxed feeling, which is fine. But I thought at the beginning, all the information that we really had was how many people have been tested, how many people had tested positive, and where. So that's what we started with. And of course, it's very bare bones at the beginning. We basically had this system called Merlin, which every single lab or hospital or Department of Health in the state fed data directly to. So sometimes we would get duplicate data. Sometimes we would get incomplete data or data that had the wrong county. Like, we don't have a lot of hospitals in Northwest Florida. So there are entire counties where there are no hospitals. So people would be going, let's say if they lived in Jackson, going over to Leon County, because that's where Tallahassee's hospital is. And they would be counted there instead of Jackson where they live. And so we worked out a lot of those kinks in action. So, of course, people would see like, oh, wait, you said there was this and then this. It's like, well, we're figuring this out as we go.
Science,
yes.
It evolves. It's amazing as data comes in.
Yeah, and data upkeep is a huge project. And there were only two of us. It was me and the database manager for epidemiology. That was it. They actually moved my office from the dungeon downstairs that had no windows to the corner office with all the windows, which I was really, really thrilled about. So I could be right next to her, partly so that we'd stop emailing each other because they didn't want to create email chains for public records requests. We were flat out told this. My supervisor put it in a legally binding deposition that we were told to stop emailing in case of public records requests, but I still did it anyways. To me, the biggest flag was saying, well, let's stop putting things in writing. I was like, no. You come in my office, you tell me to do something. As soon as you leave, I'm writing an email to you saying, you just came into my office and told me to do exactly these things. Just wanted to make sure we got the go ahead. That whole process that I had coming into this, being skeptical of government, especially government tells you not to have written records, saved my life. Because without those records, it would look like a black hole in time with no evidence of anything. And
you document your experiments. Gosh, imagine that.
And we admitted our mistakes. When something would happen and the dashboard would show glitchy, I had a data users listserv. So county emergency management offices, local municipalities, some members of the media who were using the data feed to plug into their maps. I would flat out tell them, I was like, hey guys, just wanted to let you know, we switched from, oh God, what did we do? We switched programming languages at some point. And this was a decision that was made in EPI, but nobody told me. So when I went to go pull the data, disaster ensued. And this was actually the weekend, I think, before Easter of 2020. And I was like, oh God, did we change something? Because nothing is the same. I was like, nothing's working. And I had to spend the whole weekend trying to go back and figure it out. But, I would say like, hey, we switched programming languages. So if you see some glitches, we're working it out. And people understood that. That's called being honest, being transparent. Things happen, things change. This volume of data dealing with millions of lines of code causes things to sometimes not work right. And as long as we were informing people of that, it wasn't a controversy. Like there wouldn't be a news article saying, hey, the data went down for 15 minutes between blah, 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 and then it changed because we had already explained it. There was a record of us explaining it. That started to change in May very quickly when the state decided to reopen. And their plan was actually called Safe, Smart, Step by Step. You can still get it online, the copy of what the plan was supposed to be. So I'm supposed to have my first weekend off in months, the weekend of April 26th. I get a call Friday night late at like 7:00. And it's my boss saying, hey, I know you're supposed to have this weekend off, but they're reopening the state. And no one had asked us. No one had come to us and said, are we ready? Like, can you do some numbers to crunch to see if we're ready? No one.
No.
And
they do that and they'd get facts. The hell good are facts?
Well, I think this was part ignorance because nobody in leadership was ever involved with the data processing to begin with. And they never visited us. You know, it wasn't like, hey, are you guys doing okay? You people who are here working 16 hours a day, leaving for work before your kids up, you know, wake up, coming home after their sleep. Are y'all okay? Nobody ever did that. We were the people who made things run without the glory. And my boss said, well, we're going to need to develop a criteria to determine what is safe to reopen. And then we're going to need a way to measure it. And then we're going to need to prep the dashboard to reflect it. And we need this tomorrow. And I called my counterpart in Epi and I was like, okay. But we did it. We actually got it, not the next day. We got it done Sunday morning. So we get the call Friday night. It's done Sunday morning. We basically took most of the parts of the White House's COVID task force plan. So, you know, based on certain rate, hospitalization rates, testing rates, case rates, that model. And they wanted to put a whole bunch of Trump stuff on it too, under the information thing. And I actually fought back and won against that too. I was like, this whole dashboard works. We are the most celebrated state right now for COVID data because we're not political, because Governor DeSantis's name is not on it, because Donald Trump's name is not on it, because it is the Department of Health's dashboard. They know scientists are running it. They know we care because we're in constant communication with them. I answered every email I got from the public, no matter how angry or upset they were, because I realized they're afraid and they're hearing mixed things and they're trying to go to somebody for answers. And I look like online the person who's got all the answers. So they come to me and I'd always, you know, talk to them and say, look, I understand you're afraid. This is the information we have. This is why that information may not, you know, be complete. And this is the things you should consider about it. And that became this massive, like 80-page data definitions document that every time I got asked a question, we would work together to come up with the proper answer and put it in there. And I was pretty proud of that too. Apparently that was not a normal thing. And I knew that people they just needed answers. We weren't trying to tell anybody what to do. We weren't dictating rules. We were just saying, look, you have a right to make informed decisions. Whatever decisions that you make are up to you, but you have a right to the information needed to make those decisions. And so I pushed back on the Trump thing and we didn't end up, you know, putting anything in there with Trump. And because half the state wouldn't trust it. The second that we put his name on it, half the state would be like, this is a propaganda tool, bye. And we needed people to do that. We got to the criteria, we presented it, or actually I presented it because for some reason they thought that I should be the person to go to state leadership and say, here's the results. And, you know, and yeah, I know. And when I say I think it was part ignorance, I think when they saw the results for the first time, they honestly believed that it would look good. And it didn't. And there was almost a sense of panic within DOH leadership to try to make it better. And that included dropping criteria entirely. So one of the hospital metrics we initially had, because there were 3 common basically symptom sets of hospital surveillance data that we got. There was influenza, because that was commonly diagnosed, you know, when you got to the hospital, obviously COVID, and this is pre-testing. So this is before people are tested and we need to keep an eye on that first. And pneumonia. Pneumonia was the single diagnosis most closely associated with COVID-19 in a hospital. We knew that. Everybody knows that. It's been a well-established fact. We were told to drop it, because if we included it, nothing would be going down anywhere. And so we took it out entirely. There was supposed to be a testing metric. So we had to test a certain amount of people, obviously, in order to get a proper gauge on community spread. They dropped that because according to one of my supervisors, well, if people are in rural places, they naturally, this was the most bizarre email ever, socially distance, and we're not doing enough testing in those counties, so we're going to exempt them. I was like, no, the whole point of it is that you do more testing. That's the point. I don't know where this naturally socially distanced idea came from in rural counties, because I grew up in a rural county on the Gulf Coast. And that's not how things work. You have one country store, and you guarantee everybody in the county is going to it. You have one doctor, everybody in the county is going to it. That's not how these things work. It actually creates these dense concentrations of sick people. If you only have one grocery store, one doctor's office, one of this, everyone is there. But they needed to massage things.
Great person to do this. This is, wow, what a match. What a match.
Yeah. Well, I decided that, I voiced my concerns, but it was a policy decision that was not mine to make. And so we ended up exempting all rural counties in the state. And they arbitrarily assigned us as, I think it was either population less than 75,000 or 100,000. It was one of those two, which was about half the counties in the state. And we now, of course, know that rural counties, which in every kind of disaster, this is true, especially health disasters, are hit hardest. And we just said, they don't have to be beholden to it at all. I made the comment in one of my emails, well, is there really a point in having a criteria if half the counties in the state don't have to follow the criteria? And they were like, well, yeah. Still soldiered on. And it was when we got to flat out data manipulation that I stopped. Because like I said, deciding not to include something, I'm not a doctor. That's not my decision to make. Granted, the person running the response was not a medical doctor either, but not my call. But when they wanted us to, and they eventually did, invent a positivity calculation that they use and only they use, they are the only place in the entire world that uses, I had a problem with it. And eventually said, look, I'm not going to make that calculation because that's not a real number. It's not a real positivity percent. But if you send me whatever it is and all the equations that you use to get it, I'll publish that because that's my job. And I think that was one of the first things that I realized something is going downhill very quickly. And so after that, because one of the main, we ended up with just 4 criteria. After all of that, it was cases had to be going down for 2 weeks straight, and positivity had to be below 10% for 2 weeks straight. And hospitalizations for just flu and COVID had to be going down for 2 weeks straight, not pneumonia. And then now I can't remember what the other one was, but that's been so long now. But it was just those 4. And even after creating a fake positivity rate, which was what was keeping most counties from being able to reopen, because again, if you have a county where you only tested 10 people and 2 are positive, you don't make it. I even suggested statistical methodology to counteract that kind of small problem, issue, to set up like control blocks within like 2 standard deviations. Yeah. It was like I was speaking Greek to the people in charge. They were like, oh, that sounds all complicated. I was like, yeah, but it'd be a more accurate picture if you decide not to test people. But, yeah, I know, right? They had a problem with doing that math, but not the weird positivity calculation. And I think it's partly because she just had no idea what I was talking about. I don't even think she knew what a standard deviation was. And then when all of that didn't work, she said, you know what, I'm just going to give you a list of the counties we're going to open, and you're going to put a yes or no for each one of whether or not they meet the criteria. And I said, no. And I was like, if you want me to say that we've used these measurements, and according to these measurements, this county meets all of those, and it does not, that is a lie, and I will not do it. And I actually laughed in her face when she asked me to do it. Because I thought it was a joke. I was like, I've been in climate science. Do you have any idea the scrutiny that we are under, how all of our data is public? All of our methods are always public because it's a controversial subject. The idea that someone would come and tell you or instruct you to intentionally publish misleading information, your career would be done. You would be done if anybody found that out, because that is the level of scrutiny that we are under. And so she said that, and I literally went, no, like just like that. And she got really serious, and she was like, I once had this data person who told me, you tell me what you want the numbers to look like and I'll make it happen. And I realized she was serious. And I said, well, I bet you they, didn't have a PhD either. And that was the last time that they wanted to deal with me. And apparently they went to the epidemiologist's office and asked them to do the same thing. And they said no. So then they hired a private vendor. And the black box, yep, they put everything into a black box, spit it out and said, everything's great. It's safe. It's smart, step by step based on these criteria when it wasn't, which is part of the basis of my whistleblower lawsuit against the state, which got me fired. I was fired the day after, not after all this happened. I was still the manager for 2 weeks after all this happened. And I agreed to stay on, even though I wanted to quit, so I could help them prep for hurricane season, because this was May. And at the Department of Health, because I was attached to the Emergency Response Bureau, there's a whole lot of stuff that has to happen in preparation for hurricane season. And I didn't want to leave them hanging. And I had other job offers making 3 times as much money. But I said I would, stick it out for a while. And then when I said I was going to file a whistleblower suit, I get fired the next day before I even come in. Yeah. So, which is even worse than if they had fired me for just refusing to manipulate it. Because once you say, look, I'm filing this complaint to my boss, in texts and emails. So of course there's proof. And then they fire you. That's a big no-no. And of course I didn't know this. This was my first run in taking on, an entire state. So I had never, been in this position before. And so that happened on a Monday. And by Wednesday, the governor of the state was in front of the vice president of the United States. I don't care who was holding the office. It's still the vice president, defaming me and attacking me. And I have no idea what the hell's going on. I was like, when did he get involved? It's like, I've been on like a couple conference calls with him. I've seen him in the Emergency Operations Center, but I've never shaken the man's hand. I don't know him. I don't have a relationship with him. Why is he doing this? And, after the shock of that kind of wore off, I fielded hundreds of job offers for jobs I didn't do, because the media did not understand data science is a huge field. And I got lots of offers from like Google and MIT to do, computational calculations and DNA sequencing and all. I was like, I'm sorry. I was like, this would be awesome. And I'm kind of thinking I should just fake it till I make it with some of these jobs because they're that sweet, but I can't do this. This is not what I do. Like I am a scientist. That I don't do computer, software engineering. Just because I can code, I do that to do science. It's pretty much, you have to learn R as a climatologist, and that's your programming language, even though I also had to learn Python because of ArcGIS, and HTML to do website encoding, and SQL to work with the Department of Health. And I was apparently the only person they had who knew all 4 languages. So they had to hire 4 people to do my job. And that's not the same as being an engineer. Yeah. And after doing that for a few weeks and seeing everything that was happening in Florida, because it got bad real quick, everybody now knows that. And it was everything that we were all afraid of. And I decided to do something about it. And so I launched my alternative dashboard and pulled in all the data we had been publishing, but were never allowed to add to the dashboard. So things like Department of Corrections cases that nobody seemed to care about. That data was always there, but we never even had a discussion about adding it. Or, of course, school cases were not available at the time when everything started. And the state actually did not want to publish them until they left a back door open and accidentally published a PDF report of hundreds of cases in schools in the first week. And I found it because, I had alerts set up on that stuff and published it. And then they had to. And that's when I founded the national tracker for COVID-19 in schools with Google. And apparently I was the only person in the entire country who gave enough crap to ask the question, well, how many cases in our schools and why don't we have that information? And that's how that project got born. And I focused more on that going forward. But everything, every sector or industry or group of people who are being affected, I felt like deserved to be there on a different tab or a different page. And I was never allowed to do that. Nobody wanted to see prison cases because nobody cared. It didn't matter how many people were dying in the prisons. And schools was an inconvenient truth, as they say, because students and especially staff were getting, cases at a much higher rate than the general population. And nobody wanted to confront that because God forbid you have to actually raise your own children in your own home for a few months so that people don't die. Also learned a lot of people hate having children that have children, which was a bizarre lesson. I was like, I can't stand having my kids home. I was like, why'd you have them? Why did you have them? Why did you start a family if you didn't think there would never be a time where you might have to take care of them? Yeah, whatever. Bad people, selfish people. And I was actually finding a lot of success and doing really well with that until December 2020. And then everything changed.
Let me ask you a question. I think people who've heard of the fine work that you did were very dismayed to hear that there was a raid on your home. Do you have a sense now of what they thought they were looking for? Obviously, they would have trumpeted any charges that were actually following. So that alone is, speaks volumes. But did they tell you what they were looking for? Did they think that somehow you had smuggled the truth out?
I had, because, the director of emergency management for the state of Florida had been feeding me information the entire time. He had been sending me data that was not publicly accessible that he could go to jail for if he wasn't in tight with DeSantis. And lots of employees at the Department of Health were making sure that I got information out that was correct if they felt like something was not being, told accurately. And that included when and why some people were fired. So the state flat out lied about why they fired their communications director. And his name was Alberto. He was a good guy, very, let's just get the job done type of person, which is what I am, and I appreciated. And apparently they didn't want to talk about COVID in the lead up to the election. It was a directive. And he put out some tweets, with some testing data and some other information, and they fired him. Then they lied publicly and said that it was an amicable resignation. Well, guess who spoke to him? Not just me, reporters. And he told the same thing. He was completely blindsided. And I was like, oh, yeah, I can tell you a thing or two about that. And that was a few weeks before the raid. And so they kind of had this mass firing and reshifting in early November. And when this happened, some employee of DOH, of the Department of Health, had sent a text message to other employees of DOH telling them to speak out and be honest. That was the justification for the raid.
Honest? Why, it's unheard of.
A text message to DOH employees. I think there was a couple of things going on. Honestly, Ron DeSantis is such a psychopath that I can't understand a person that devoid of empathy or morality to try to, and I don't want to, frankly. We filed a public records request in July of last year, which has still not been filled. Yeah, I know, right? All of his and his inner circle's communications with, so like 5 or 6 people that were on his staff, his communications people, and who was criminally charged with stalking me before she got her job as his press secretary. Criminally charged in the state of Maryland for stalking me. That was her tryout for her job. And, the police, the FDLE, the National Review, a couple of alt-right places, not very many. And, we've done public records requests. We expected like a few hundred. You can't possibly be stupid to put that much information in an email. Of the things that specifically mentioned me with this inner circle over 1 year, 4,300 emails. 4,000.
Backhanded compliment. Obviously, you made an impact.
That's obsession. That is a sick obsession. That's 12 times a day, every single day, Saturday through Saturday for a year straight. If I had known he was that obsessed, if he was that fixated on just, in his words, a girl with a laptop who wounded and bruised his ego and hurt his COVID celebration scheme, I would have gotten my family out of the state. I had no idea. I had no idea he was that crazy. And so I don't think it really matters. I don't understand the psyche behind what he was doing. Other than that, 2 things were very clear. One, they didn't come from me because we published the video. I came out, I had my arms up. I just assumed I was being arrested for some shit. And we knew that was always a possibility. My husband and I had discussed it. We said, well, if we go to war with him, he's probably going to find a way to hurt it. You know, me, that was my burden.
Yeah.
After they have me outside and I tell them my husband and my kids are inside, then one of the officers pulls out his gun and they point all of their weapons at my husband and my 2-year-old daughter and my 11-year-old son standing in the stairs, pushing my son around in the doorway with an AR-15 looking type weapon to his back. And I mean, we have we have that and so much more in video. We have 45 minutes of video, which include discussions that the police didn't think that were overheard. And yeah, they were there to scare me. I had a really good week the week before the raid. You know, I'd done every major news network on what was happening with schools, big piece in USA Today, and the US News and World Report. Everything actually was having a pretty damn good week. And then that happened. And we woke up to that. And when I said publicly, you know, that they came out with guns and I wouldn't be updating anything, they actually released a public statement saying that at no time were guns drawn. And I was like,
Of course, again, there's those cameras.
Yeah, one camera that honestly, I sat there as I was running downstairs. It was almost like God intervening, saying like, grab it. That's honest to God what I thought. I thought maybe if they rough me up when they're arresting me, it'll capture it. That's what I thought might happen. Or they would overhear, the camera would pick up whatever charges, which of course there were none, they were there to arrest me on. And I hadn't used that camera since I did this thing with Geraldo Rivera like months before. I didn't know if it was charged. I didn't know if it even had a memory card in it or if the memory card in it had any space. It literally felt like something inside said, grab it, just grab it, turn it on, put it on the cat tree, just let it record. And if I didn't have that, I don't think anybody would have ever believed me. I think if I just went on the news and said, they came in, they had me, they were pushing me around outside, feeling me up, and then pulled out their guns, forced my family outside at gunpoint where it was, you know, it was December, it was freezing outside. None of my kids have socks or shoes on or coats on. And nobody would have, they would have been like, oh, see, she's the crazy person that we told you about. And I don't think they planned on that video of me just immediately hitting back. It did shake me up. Of course it shook me up. I'm having a gun pointed at my face. I felt almost nothing. But when they came in the house, I think it's kind of clear from my reaction that I was petrified. And so, yes, it did scare me, but it made it that much more important that I not be silent. And for me, being a human is one thing, but for me, I had become at that point the symbol of standing up for science against government malfeasance. And I was not going to let them break that image. So I did Chris Cuomo live that night and hit back as hard as we could do.
There were no charges ever filed on that.
Well, that was the other thing I thought they were doing. So scare me. I thought at first they were trying to get at my sources, but my phone was too encrypted. They never broke it. So maybe they were and just couldn't get it. I don't know. The other thing I thought is like, once they have my computer, they're going to see that I have things that I shouldn't have, or they're going to find something else that they can make it seem like is a crime. And for them, that was a contact roster of our emergency management response people, which was sent out to us at least 4 times during COVID. And it's all public information, the names and work email addresses and office numbers. So you could file a public records request if the state ever decides to start filling those again and get that information. But apparently I wasn't allowed to have it. And so that's what they thought they were going to go after me for, which of course, you know, it's been a year and, oh, wow, almost 3 months. And I'm running for Congress against Matt Gaetz. So
good for you. Good for you. Please tell our audience how they can support you in your continued desire to make Florida a better place and to bring science back to this poor, benighted state.
I plan on taking the fight for, and it's not just about science, it's about government accountability and transparency all the way. I don't care how far this takes me or what it looks like. I'm going to take it as far as I can. And that's what I'm doing here. We have a congressman in my district who's, an alleged sex trafficker of underage boys and girls. And she's been accused of witness tampering and bribery and fraud and is never here. And in his 3 terms, he's going for a 4th, has only passed one bill. And it was in his first year. And I personally feel like by the end of this, he'll have made over $1 million in salary to be a representative. That's a terrible investment to pay someone $1 million to represent your area and only ever have one bill. It's not like we don't have problems, that need fixed. It's not like our country doesn't have problems that need fixed. And that's the work that needs to be done. And so I'm the Democratic candidate running against him. And a Democrat has not won this district in 30 years. And that's a long time. And there hasn't been a Democrat that has polled within 20 points of the GOP incumbent in almost that entire time. And last October, I was trailing by about 6. And we're doing our current polling right now. And it looks like we're within the margin of error. So turns out that despite this far right media, smear campaigns and flat out lies and slander and this try to control the narrative that people hate science, that's not true. That's not true. I grew up in an area that wasn't exactly teaching science, and yet people still want to know. They know that they have a right to know. Nobody likes it when the government lies to them. It's kind of weird that we ended up in this paradox where it's now the Republican government that is now authoritarian. DeSantis has gone full authoritarian. You can't say gay in schools. If your kid wants a vegetarian meal, apparently they have to call the parents and get permission. Your kid can't just decide he doesn't want to eat meat anymore. Banning critical race theory and law programs across the state as if it's being taught in kindergarten, and everything else that he's been doing. Making it legal to run over protesters with your car, making it so that if you're arrested during a riot, which is a very loosely defined term now of like 8 or more people blocking or obstructing traffic, if you're arrested in the proximity to a riot, you can be held without bail indefinitely. Now that is some Castro level kind of stuff. And they are now the ones who are big government lying to everybody. And it turns out that the whole time, most of the good people here who were Republicans didn't like that. They didn't like it when they felt it was Democrats, and they don't like it when it's Republicans. They don't want to be lied to. They are sick of being talked down to. They are sick of being treated like they're too stupid to see through it or too stupid to understand information. My entire job was to make sure everybody could understand that information. People are not as stupid as people like Ron DeSantis want them to think. And that's a wake-up call especially for DeSantis, but for Matt Gaetz especially, to think that, this area is so dumb, that's what he thinks, that no matter what, they're going to vote for me because I have an R by my name. And I'm sure there will be a lot of people who do vote for him just because he's a Republican. And I'm not beyond admitting that the Democratic Party can be toxic to candidates in areas like this. I actually filed to run as an NPA, to be an independent. And I ran an independent campaign for months until I found out they changed the law and I had to run as a Democrat. And people are better and smarter and more loving, I think, than people like Matt Gaetz and Ron DeSantis want them to think. And we're proving that. We just flipped an R30 into probably a Democratic seat. And we're gonna make some waves. And DeSantis has a strong interest in making sure I never get to Congress, because he knows the minute I'm there with my power, I'm going to investigate everything that he did, because the people of Florida deserve justice. We have one of the highest mortality rates in the country. Last year, the highest. After vaccines were available, Florida did worse than every other state, including Mississippi, which is where I'm from. And Mississippi, love that state. My whole family still lives in that state, except for some Florida family. is pretty much last in everything. And Florida did worse. And they didn't have to.
Election in November of 22.
Yes. So November 8th will be the election for this year. That's the general. There's a primary in August 23rd, which you have to be a registered Democrat in the state of Florida to vote in a Democratic primary because we don't have open primaries.
Right.
And so we're doing the work here on the ground. And I think that a lot of the Republicans that are in this kind of fringe group banked on me coming here and being some radical liberal. Maybe they saw what universities I went to and assumed I'd be an elitist. They didn't count on the fact that I grew up poor in South Mississippi, even homeless at times, and had to do this crazy thing that they won't understand of working to get everything that you have. And they found out she's actually just a normal person who's sick of the way things are and wants to do better. And turns out that's all you actually need.
Rebekah, thank you so very much. This has been just so good, so interesting. I salute you absolutely so much. Thank you so much. Your continued drive to help is just so remarkable. Thank you. And I wish you every success. I'll be donating to Rebekah Jones for Congress.
Thank you.
That's for sure.
Thank you. And I always like to end with something positive because I know this past 2 years story has been, it involves guns on children. So it's a little rough. But I will say that when I was young, everyone told me by the time I finished college, I'd lose that passion, that spark. And everyone in college said by the time you finish grad school, and everyone in grad school said by the time you finish your PhD, and everyone said, oh, after 10 years of working, blah, blah. I didn't because if we don't let ourselves lose sight of what matters, if we refuse to accept things as being broken, we will always have the energy and the drive to fix them. So this whole idea of, young people can't sustain that kind of passion and integrity, clearly you are here. And everyone who's watching here is probably not a 15-year-old who's being told that they won't be like that forever. But for those young people who are, don't ever accept the bad advice of bitter people, because I am living proof. And this is the thing that scares DeSantis more than anything. I'm living proof that one person can change everything in a heartbeat and can overcome the powers of the third largest state in the country, in the greatest country and most powerful country in the world, if you decide that that's who you want to be. And that's what they're afraid of. And every person who listens to this, who watches this, who goes to our website, that's what they know. That's the lesson that they take away. One girl with a laptop changed Florida history, and everyone else can too.
I think you're going to continue to change the climate wherever you go. Thank you so very much. Best of luck. I can't say that enough. Best of luck, Rebekah. Have a wonderful day, and thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.